February 1945. The end of World War II looks imminent. The big three are in Yalta Crimea to negotiate the future of Europe post-war and wrap up World War II. Many believe the outcome of this conference essentially starts the Cold War, dividing the democratic West and communist East. In this talk, we discuss what happens at Yalta, what influenced leaders' decisions from multiple perspectives, and provide you with the evidence and information to make up your own mind about Yalta. Sitting at the table, forming the big three: US President Franklin D. Roosevelt, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. The main reason they have met together is to decide the fate of Germany post-war. Okay, let's go through the major discussion points at Yalta. Number 1, what to do with Germany post-war. The three knew there was a great possibility that Germany was going to try once more to rule the world. They all agreed on the complete demilitarization and denazification of Nazi Germany. This meant Nazi political parties were banned and the Nazi organization completely disestablished. They agreed upon dividing Germany into 4 parts. Eastern Germany became Soviet occupied, Western Germany shared between France, Britain, and the United States. The war in Europe is still 3 months away from finishing, but the state of the war currently has a large part to play in Yalta. The Soviets had the Germans on the run, advancing to within 40 miles east of Berlin. The Allies were encroaching from the west, currently positioned outside the German border close to the Rhine. This put the Soviets in a much better bargaining position. For a start, they are a lot closer to Berlin and have liberated many Eastern European countries previously occupied by Nazi Germany. They have sacrificed many more lives in this war. By the end of the war, which is only a few months away at this point, an estimated 24 million Soviet-Russian deaths, including civilians, to under 1 million British and American combined deaths. So this is going to have huge leverage later in the conference. It cannot be ignored that the Soviets have sacrificed more. Number 2, what to do with the Pacific Front. The Pacific Front seemed far from over, and Roosevelt knew he needed the Soviets' help to end this part of the war. The Soviets agreed to join this front 2 to 3 months after the war in Europe had ended. In return, the Soviets would be granted land from Mongolia, lost during the Russo-Japanese War. And the Soviets do end up fulfilling this promise, invading Japanese-occupied Manchuria on August 8, 1945. This being the main reason for the Japanese formal surrender 1 week later, not the popular opinion of fear due to the dropped atom bombs. Number 3, forming the United Nations. After much debate, the Soviet Union agreed on joining the new League of Nations, top of Roosevelt's priorities, later becoming the United Nations. The purpose of this organization was to maintain international peace and security, develop friendly relations among nations. That sounds so good, it even rhymes. Stalin initially wanted all 16 Soviet states to be represented separately, but this would give them too much power. Instead, they agreed upon 3 states: Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. Roosevelt also threw in a sweetener, offering the Soviets veto power, giving them more influence. Joseph Stalin's main objective was to create a sphere of influence around Soviet Russia, a buffer zone between the democratic West and the communist East. He intended to keep the countries he had liberated, or were they conquered, as communist controlled. Winston Churchill's main priority of the conference was the opposite, for these countries to have democratic elections. There was high expectations from many of these countries that the British and the United States would negotiate aggressively for democratic elections, especially Poland that had been invaded by Germany, then the Soviets, then Germany, then the Soviets again. Churchill and FDR took a cautious and respectable approach to negotiations with Stalin. Roosevelt wrote Churchill his strategy on Stalin before Tehran. "We are all in agreement as to the necessity of having the USSR as a fully accepted and equal member of an association of the great powers formed for the purpose of preventing international war." He continues, "It should be possible to accomplish this by adjusting our differences through compromise by all the parties concerned." Roosevelt envisioned political benefits of a positive relationship between the United States and Soviet Russia. He was prepared to compromise for the purpose of preventing international war, and they felt the best strategy was to accept Stalin as one of them, a powerful world leader. But did they respect Joseph Stalin too much? Deep down, he did not care, as almost all democratic politicians do, whether people liked him. Ultimately, Stalin was not interested in being accepted by other world leaders, only what benefited the Soviet Union. Stalin had a reputation, a totalitarian dictator. He did things his way. Infamous for horrific acts to many, Stalin was not just a punisher, but also a charmer. He was always superb with people. He presented himself as quiet, gentle, a listener, an honest straight shooter in a very charismatic way. In negotiations, he took the backseat, letting Churchill and FDR talk things out and ramble on. Stalin, when he did speak, was very much to the point. He came across as trustworthy. British Foreign Secretary was so impressed with Stalin's performance, he wrote, "If I had to pick a team for going into a conference room, Stalin would be my first choice." Now, don't get me wrong, Stalin was cruel, sociopath, intentionally murdering millions, trusted no one, and was paranoid of everyone but himself. But he was a very skilled negotiator and manipulator. Churchill and FDR underestimated Stalin time and time again. What would happen to Poland? During the Tehran conference, Churchill was pressured into an agreement for the Soviet Union to obtain part of Eastern Poland post-war. In exchange, part of Germany given to Poland, rearranging the borders. Churchill was attempting to appease Stalin, giving this up to compromise for democratic elections in the East. The British and the Americans supported the democratic Polish government in exile based in London. Stalin had no intention of giving power to these Poles. In 1944, after the Red Army had retaken Poland, Stalin had installed his own Soviet Polish government. They eventually agreed upon the exiled Poles having a small part to play in this government. Months later, they were invited to Moscow to negotiate, but were really sent to the gulags, known as the Trial of 16. This event causing further distrust. They agreed that future governments of Eastern European nations, including Poland, bordering the Soviet Union, should be friendly to the Soviet regime, while the Soviets pledged to allow free elections in all territories liberated from Nazi Germany. But could Stalin really be trusted to go through with this? No method of regulations were put in place to police free elections. Churchill and FDR were simply trusting his word. At the conclusion of the conference, Churchill felt confident about Stalin. He says, "Poor Neville Chamberlain believed he could trust with Hitler. He was wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong about Stalin." Well, turns out he was wrong about Stalin. Within days, there were reports of Soviets intimidating Romania's king and government, and in time, many others. Churchill felt there was nothing he could do. He says, "I have not the slightest intention of being cheated over Poland." Stalin ultimately respected physical power only. and he knew that he could not be stopped. He believed one should distrust words, twisting and reworking the agreement to suit him, redefining free elections and friendly in Eastern Europe to the Soviet Union. Friendly, meaning to him any organisation that is not pro-Soviet or communist is not friendly. Many have been critical of the language used in the agreement. Admiral William Leahy, Chief of Staff, said to FDR, "This agreement on Poland is so elastic that the Russians can stretch it all the way from Yalta to Washington without ever technically breaking it." Roosevelt responds, "I know, Bill, but it is the best I can do for Poland at this time." Was it really? Over the following months, Stalin forced many Eastern European countries into communism against their will, this being the start of the Cold War, the Soviets' direct threat to democracy. It's fair to say at this point of the war, there is some hard truth swinging in the Soviets' favour. The Red Army is closer to Berlin, they have sacrificed more lives to the war, and the Soviets occupy Eastern Europe. But the negotiation table is where it matters. FDR and Churchill appear to have been outplayed by Stalin on Poland and Eastern Europe. Is this the best they could do for Poland at this time, or was it the right decision? In hindsight, they did avoid World War III, but further international conflict continues even today. What do you think? Could the Cold War have been avoided with better decisions from FDR and Churchill? Yes or no, and why? Post what you think in the comments, like and subscribe for more detailed analysis of the Cold War and history.